morning to you, and thank you so much for finding time to join us today. We do apologize for the late start of the show this morning, a bit of a technical hitch, but nonetheless we're here. And here are the latest headlines from across the continent of Africa. I'll start with the newspapers from Kenya. The Standard newspaper. Horror tales of cult graveyard. That is what we have there. And lower power bills. You will have to wait a bit longer. And Harry Belafonte, singer and actor, dies at the age of 96. The Daily Nation Ruto Raila talks flop as MPs viewed. And then teachers say no to pay cut for proposed housing fund. The government, I think, was proposing a 3% pay cut for civil servants. Varsity entry exam proposal sparks debate. It will be double testing, KCSE, which tests a number of subjects and a more specific university test on their field of interest. Okay. And Shakahola death toll hits 90. CS calls it genocide. Very well. And then the People Daily. Shakahola cult deaths, who let down the victims? I think that is the big question that many Kenyans are grappling with since the coming to the limelight of what has been happening there. And then the Business Daily, dollar market distortion eases after Ruto directive, and the Taifa Leo, Agenti wa Mauti 90 plus, people who have died. That is what the Taifa Leo is saying this morning. And so let's look at some other newspapers. Let's go all the way to Zimbabwe. The Daily News, opposition faces Nora's 2023 polls as analysts say vote remains ZANU-PF's to lose. Zesa says better days are coming. The Herald as well from Zimbabwe, leaders converge for Transform Africa Summit, and Second Republic accelerates project completion to push forward development. Judge quits as tribunal is sworn in. Vanguard from Nigeria, Paul's Obi's case threatened as Labour Party factions fight dirty. And on Sudan, evacuation delayed as federal government warns Nigerian students against dangerous journeys. The Punch newspaper as well from Nigeria, evacuation begins today as federal government releases 150 million naira, hires 40 buses. The Daily Trust, that is still from Nigeria, 96% of female candidates crash out. And then the Citizen from Tanzania, when blind religious zealotry turns deadly. The discovery of 90 bodies linked to a cult in Kenya should serve as a wake-up call across East Africa, where religious zealotry has gained a foothold in the last few decades, according to commentators. That story is on page 5. On the Citizen, East Africa may have lost up to $70 billion to COVID-19, and how government saved 7.6 trillion Tanzania shillings in 9 months. Okay, the Daily Monitor from Uganda, arrest over iron sheets silence minister's sirens. The Observer, iron sheets, also from Uganda, iron sheets saga, was it a setup? Okay, now that is the other scandal that has refused to go away. And headlines from the U.S., The Guardian U.S. version, Tucker Carlson leaves Fox News reportedly fired by Rupert Murdoch. The U.S. Today, clinical trials offer hope for not promises. Tucker Carlson leaves Fox News and school choice could see real-world consequence. The Washington Post, hit with early-stage Alzheimer's, but refusing to surrender. And then suspect in 2021 Kabul blast killed by Taliban. For Biden, a final run to cap a long career. And barrier-breaking entertainer and global activist dies. That is Belafonte there. He was also a human rights activist during those days of, earlier days the times. I think he worked so much with the likes of Martin Luther King and others. As Tony Brooks to lead Climate Hub, that is on the news day. And then some newspapers from the UK. UK troops ready to use force in Khartoum airlift. That is iNews. The Metro, run for your lives. That is what we see there. And the Independent, William paid by Sun publisher over phone hacking. Prince given very large sum by Murdoch tabloid after secret deal approved by Queen. Okay. The Guardian, the UK version. Charles undermined Queen over plan to sue Murdoch, says Harry. The Daily Express, surely a tax cut boost is now on the cards? That is the question. And then the Times, make your own way to Sudan, airlift Britons told. The Daily Telegraph, Harry, quote, claims leave coronation peace hopes in tatters. The Daily Mail, you need to accept you are poorer. Fury, £190,000 a year bank chief tells the rest of us. And then Charles from the chocolate factory. I think there's a chocolate factory there with his image. I don't know if I want to eat that, but anyway, we'll just leave that there and move on to the latest news from across the continent of Africa. And we have been keeping you up to date with the developments from Sudan, and we shall start our conversation from there, as at least 20 people were injured on Tuesday after 2 shells fell on a medical center in Sudan's most popular city, Omdurman, according to hospital officials. I apologize. Bloodstains cover the floor at Al-Rumi Medical Center after it was hit by the projectile shells at noon. Local time, no one was fatally injured and wounded. Patients were moved to a nearby hospital. Dozens of hospitals have been shuttered in Khartoum and elsewhere across the country due to the fighting, dwindling medical and fuel supplies. According to the Sudanese Doctors Syndicate, the fighting between the country's military and the paramilitary rapid support forces has plunged Sudan into chaos, pushing the already heavily aid-dependent African nation to the brink of collapse. So where is Omar Al-Bashir? An attack on the prison holding deposed Sudanese strongman Omar Al-Bashir has raised questions about his whereabouts, with one of the warring sides saying he is being held in a secure location and other alleging he has been released. Al-Bashir, who ruled Sudan for 3 decades despite wars and sanctions, was overthrown during a popular uprising in 2019. He is wanted by the International Criminal Court for genocide and other crimes committed during the conflict in Sudan's western Darfur region in the 2000s. He and other former top officials accused of atrocities have been held in Kobar, a prison in Khartoum, for the last 4 years, as authorities have declined ICC request that they handed him over. And by the way, just a few moments ago, before I start this bulletin, there was an update over that story that he was taken to the hospital. Apparently, he was not feeling well, but nevertheless, the army, Sudanese military and the paramilitary rapid support forces, which together had removed Al-Bashir from power during mass protests, are now battling one another across the capital. The fighting reached the prison over the weekend, with conflicting reports about what transpired. Military officials told the Associated Press that Al-Bashir, as well as Abdel Rahim Mohammed Hussein Ahmed, who held senior security positions during the Darfur crisis, had been moved to a military-run medical facility in Khartoum under tight security for their own safety. The officials spoke on condition of anonymity because they were not authorized to discuss the matter with the media. The army later accused the RSF of donning military uniforms and attacking the prison, saying they released inmates and looted the facility. The RSF, led by General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, denied the allegations and claimed that the military forcibly evacuated the facility as part of a plan to restore Al-Bashir to power. Local media, meanwhile, aired a purported audio statement from Harun in which he said that he and other former officials were left in the prison complex guarded by a small number of security forces and were later allowed to walk free. He said they left the prison for their own safety because of the fighting and the lack of food or water. He did not mention Al-Bashir or say where he and other officials were. A lawyer of Al-Bashir did not respond to phone calls or messages seeking comment. Burhan and other senior officers served under Al-Bashir, and activists say the Islamist deep state that underpinned his long rule is still very much intact. Dagalo also once served as a loyal enforcer to Al-Bashir, helping to suppress rebellions in Darfur and other provinces. Both the military and the RSF have sought to portray themselves as allies of the country's pro-democracy movement, who are trying to restore its transition to civilian rule. But both have a long history of brutalizing activists and protesters, and they joined forces to remove civilian leaders from power in a coup less than 2 years ago. And very well. So a second evacuation flight rescuing UK nationals from war-torn Sudan has landed in Cyprus. The passengers and a further 39 from an earlier rescue flight on Tuesday are expected to be given the chance to fly to the UK from Larnaca airport later. British troops are attempting to get UK nationals out of the East African country during a 72-hour ceasefire. The BBC was told 39 people were flown out of the first RAF plane and 3 rescue flights are planned in total. Trapped British nationals have been told to make their own way to an airstrip near Sudanese capital Khartoum once it was clear the ceasefire that began at midnight local time on Monday was holding. An RAF military plane is being used to pick up British passport holders from the airstrip and fly them to Larnaca airport, where their documentation is checked, and then a total of 260 people has been expected on the flights, but the Foreign Office has yet to confirm how many people made it to the second plane, which arrived at Larnaca in the early hours of Wednesday. The Foreign Office have said its aim is that the evacuees will only be in Cyprus for less than 48 hours before they can take up the option of flying to the UK. It is thought there is a small window of relative safety for the evacuation efforts to be exploited. And South Africa is not planning to quit the International Criminal Court as earlier suggested by President Cyril Ramaphosa, his office said on Tuesday, citing a communication error by the ruling ANC party. Hours earlier, Ramaphosa had said his African National Congress had decided to withdraw South Africa from the International Criminal Court, which last month issued an arrest warrant against Russian President Vladimir Putin. The ICC arrest warrant meant that Pretoria, which is to host the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa bloc summit this year, would have to detain Putin on arrival. It said the clarification follows an error in a comment made during a media briefing held by the governing African National Congress. The ANC had earlier told journalists that the issue of South Africa withdrawing from ICC had been raised at a weekend meeting of its National Executive Council. Then, when questioned by journalists during a joint media conference with the visiting President Sauli Niinisto of Finland, Ramaphosa said the ANC has taken the decision that it is prudent that South Africa should pull out of the ICC. The presidency said regrettably, Ramaphosa had erroneously affirmed a similar position to the ruling party. In another statement Tuesday night, the ANC said an unintended impression may have been created that a categorical decision for an immediate withdrawal had been taken. This is not so. It said the executive committee, the party's supreme decision-making body, had discussed the unequal and often selective application of international law by the ICC. The arrest warrant accused against Putin followed accusations that Kremlin unlawfully deported Ukrainian children. Or whether South Africa would arrest Putin, Ramaphosa said that the matter is under consideration, but his party's Secretary General Fikile Mbalula earlier declared that Putin can come anytime in this country. That is, in South Africa. Pretoria has close ties with Moscow dating back decades to when the Kremlin supported the ANC's fight against the apartheid. The continental powerhouse has refused to condemn the invasion of Ukraine that has largely isolated Moscow on the international stage, saying it wants to stay neutral and prefers dialogue to end the war. South Africa made an attempt to pull out of the ICC in 2016 following a dispute a year earlier when the then Sudanese President Omar Al-Bashir visited the country for an African Union summit. It refused to arrest him despite him being the subject of an ICC arrest warrant for alleged war crimes. The controversial decision to pull out was, however, revoked when a domestic court ruled such a move would have been unconstitutional. And then we go to Ethiopia. Peace talks between the Ethiopian government and the Oromo Liberation Army, OLA, have begun on the Tanzania island of Zanzibar. A rebel commander has confirmed to the media. This is the first time the Ethiopian government is formally negotiating with OLA after years of conflict. No details have been shared so far about the format of the negotiations or who will be mediating between the two parties. Norway, Sweden and Kenya are said to have been pushing the two sides to peacefully end the hostilities in the country's vast Oromia region, where the majority of residents are Oromos, Ethiopia's largest ethnic group. The OLA has been fighting government forces since its split from a former rebel movement in 2018. The talks come about 6 months after Ethiopia's government reached a peace deal to end a bloody 2-year war in the northern region of Tigray. And back to Sudan, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres appealed on Tuesday for the fighting between the rival generals in Sudan to stop immediately and warned that it must not turn into a prolonged full-scale war. He said the parties must respect the U.S. brokered 72-hour ceasefire that started at midnight on Monday. But the Sudanese Armed Forces of General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and the paramilitary rapid support forces led by General Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo publicly pledged to uphold the hold in the fighting. The U.S. top diplomat in Sudan, Volker Perthes, told the council via a video briefing from the city of Port Sudan, where he and hundreds of UN staff have been relocated from Khartoum, that the temporary ceasefire was holding only in some parts of the country and that the army and RSF were each other accusing the other of truce violations. Since fighting began on the April 15th, he said at least 427 people have been killed and up to 4,000 wounded, and the numbers are growing. 5 aid workers are among the dead, and as well as Egyptian diplomat Perthes called on the parties to allow civilians to safety leave conflict areas. The UN envoy has been in regular contact with the rival generals. We go to Burkina Faso. The accounts are horrific. Women killed while carrying babies on their backs, the wounded hunted down, and the villagers watching the execution of their neighbors, fearing they would be next. These are some of the atrocities allegedly perpetrated by Burkina Faso security forces in the north of the country, according to a statement issued on Tuesday by locals from the village of Kama, where the violence took place. It was an early morning last Thursday when people in the village in Yatenga province awoke to a large group of armed men in military fatigues, driving motorcycles and armored pickup trucks. At least 150 civilians may have been killed and many others injured in the violence. And Ravina Shamdasani, United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights in the country, said in a statement on Tuesday, the UN is calling for a prompt, thorough, independent and impartial investigations into what it called the horrific killing of the civilians earlier this week. Burkina Faso's prosecutor said it had already opened an investigations into the killings, but put the death toll at 60, less than half the number estimated by the United Nations and the local residents. Jihadi fighters linked to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State have waged a violent insurgency in Burkina Faso for 7 years. The violence has killed thousands of people and divided the country, leading to 2 coups last year since Captain Ibrahim Traoré seized power in September 2022. During the second coup, extrajudicial killings of civilians have increased, according to rights and residents. This incident is one of the deadliest against civilians by security forces, comes amid mounting allegations against the military for committing abuses against those it believes to be supporting the jihadists. Earlier this month, Burkina Faso's government announced it was opening other investigations into allegations of human rights abuses by its security forces after a video surfaced that appeared to show the extrajudicial killing of 7 children in the country's north. Now, the Associated Press this month published its own findings about the video. AP's investigation determined that Burkina Faso security forces killed the children in a military base outside the town of Ohiguya. Days before last week's attack, some 40 security forces were killed near Ohiguya. Survivors say the soldiers accused them of being jihadi accomplices by letting them pass through their town, according to a statement from the villagers. Since the violence, people in the community haven't been able to bury their loved ones. And survivors say the soldiers accused them of being accomplices to these jihadists, and the abuses will create a backlash against Burkina Faso's junta and drive people into the hands of the jihadists, say conflict analyst. And you are now up to date with just a bit of what is happening in this continent, and some of this is just scary, like the story I just finished reading to you over the latest news and what has been happening in Burkina Faso. And right now the rest of the world is paying attention to Sudan. But there are also things that are happening in Burkina Faso, and I think yesterday I had also a news item on the same. And to learn from this report that the government forces, the army, is the one killing its own people. If you suspect that these villagers are working together with the jihadists by allowing them a clear passage, so what are you expecting these villagers to do? Fight with people who are heavily armored? If they're passing through the villages, going to wherever they are going, what are these villagers expected to do? You have failed as a government to protect them. You already know this place is a hotspot and very susceptible to this activity. So you are supposed to have beefed up security around these villages so that the villagers don't have to feel the need, don't have to be responsible to, fighting these jihadists. That is your job as the government. So these jihadists pass through these villages or are in these villages committing these atrocities, and then you come back and you kill the same people that are being terrorized by these people. And you are the government, you are the national army that is supposed to be offering protection to these people. What is happening in Burkina Faso since the coming of these Russian mercenaries, we have to say it as it is. This is the same thing that was happening in Mali. And when these foreign missions were calling it out because there were deaths that could not be explained, targeted deaths against civilians that could not be explained. And there were allegations that the military was also working in cahoots with the Russian mercenaries to meet these killings to the civilians. And so when the foreign diplomats in the country started speaking out, Mali junta was not very happy, and so the severe ties with France and others were chased out of the country because of similar things. Since the Russian mercenaries also came to Mali, and this is what has been happening in Burkina Faso. And atrocities. Now, how does the army shoot women with children on their back? How will they explain that? If at all these people are being accused of being accomplices to IS or whatever groups that is operating, these extremist groups that are operating in Burkina Faso, then I want to believe that there are proper channels these things can be handled. And one is to investigate, and two is to apprehend these suspects and try them through a judicial process. I think in any normal society that is what would happen, but I guess these are countries that right now are being led by these army juntas. They just lead by creed. I guess they have done away with the constitution and they're just doing whatever it is, and the people are under their mercy. it is quite sad, and I can only imagine the kind of threat that the people in Burkina Faso or Mali or these other countries that are under the leadership of their military have to go through. Because, at the end of the day, when it is the politicians in power, at least you have some hope that in case things go wrong, maybe the army will step in and offer you this protection. But now in these cases, when the army are in the heart and of perpetrating your rights and causing these abuses, like what you're seeing now playing out in Sudan, where does this leave the civilians? Where do they run to? Who will protect them? And so these are the questions that we have to grapple with in these very democracies that you're trying to work out, some of which are still young, and a lot of it that maybe, like in the case of Sudan, there are forces out there which will not really support a transition to a civilian government, because they feel after the ousting of Omar Al-Bashir, then that might be a threat even to how they govern, especially these countries in the Gulf area. They feel if they fully support a civilian government and that becomes a reality in Sudan, it might threaten how they do their things there, and perhaps this can be a wake-up call to call for even another uprising in this country. So it is a lot at stake. But what is happening in Burkina Faso is unacceptable. You cannot have an army killing its own people, shooting mothers with children in their back. That is unacceptable. That is absolutely unacceptable. So it's really quite disheartening. I don't know what the people are supposed to do in these instances. I don't know, because usually the army of a country, that is like the last resort you have, and you are safe. Should things get out of order, at least the army will step in and perhaps bring some order, or offer at least bring some sense of security to the people. Now the army is at the heart of committing atrocities, is at the heart of committing these human rights abuses, is at the heart of fighting with each other. And even here in Burkina Faso, and in Mali, and in Guinea, because they refuse to give way to civilian rule. Please, whatever is happening in Sudan, that is something that they're sitting down, and let me tell you, there's a section of the army in these other countries that are also watching what is happening in Sudan, and before you know it, there will be other fractions of the army that will try to dispose the ones that are in charge and are in power right now. Counter coups are to be expected. Counter coups are to be expected. So if they are smart, and if they care about their countries, Mali, Burkina Faso, Guinea should hurry up quickly and allow for a civilian transition. Otherwise, the more they stay in power, the more they're allowing an opportunity to have a counter coup, and the more these countries are likely to experience, the chances are higher for them to experience what is going on in Sudan. I know the dynamics are different. I know the undertones are different, but there is one common thread in this, and I don't want to sit here and blame the Russian mercenaries, but they are in all these countries. And immediately I heard they were in Sudan, I said, now we have a problem. I think in 2021. And I saw Hemedi calling up and, having a relationship. And every now and then he traveled, even after the attack started in Ukraine last year, I think around March, just days after the attack started, he traveled to Russia. Hemedi did. And I said, what is going on? And immediately you could hear rumors about the Russian mercenaries being in Sudan, but they have interest in gold that Hemedi, part of his the Rapid Support Forces military wing, paramilitary wing, is in charge, and other minerals. So at the end of the day, the minerals are also, the wealth of Sudan is also at the center of this chaos that we are seeing. Very complicated, but it's quite unfortunate. And then, like I was telling you here yesterday, 2 days before this war started, when the army sent out an alarm that the RSF was taking strategic positions around key towns and cities in Sudan, and it saw this as an aggression because it did this without the army's knowledge and approval. That happened immediately. The son of Khalifa Haftar left Sudan. He had brought a gift for a football team, Al-Merek, is it Al-Merek or something, that Hemedi apparently is the patron of that team. You see. So it's a lot going on. And if you allow these outside actors and these external forces, we allow them to come and mess our countries, I think it's quite unfair. And these armies in these other countries who are in power now illegally, this should serve as a lesson. What is going on in Sudan should serve as a lesson. And until they really allow for a transition to a civilian rule, what is happening in Sudan should be expected. Like, there's no two ways about it. What is happening in Sudan should be expected in these other countries. So if they're smart enough, then they should leave, they should leave power and give way to civilian rule. And then they should go back to their original work, which is to provide security for the country and its people. Okay, very well. Now, Ethiopia, the peace talks between the government and the OLA, Oromo Liberation Army, has started in Zanzibar. And one of the rebel leaders in Oromo Liberation Army has confirmed this. So this is the first time Ethiopian government is formally negotiating with OLA after years of conflict. I love that this is happening. You know, the US, Norway, Sweden, and Kenya in particular are said to have been pushing the two sides to peacefully end the hostilities in the country's vast Oromia region. And this has been the wish for anybody who is well-meaning and wants a stable Ethiopia. But I think for Ethiopia, and I like that Abiy Ahmed, the Prime Minister, is getting some sense, and he realizes that the country is bigger than his feelings or his feelings towards these rebel groups. And he realizes if he does not get a handle of things, then things will get out of hand. And I can understand why the US will push him, why Norway would push him, why Sweden would push him, and definitely why Kenya would push him, because our former president anyway has been part of that mediation process. I don't know if he'll be part of this mediation process in Zanzibar, I suppose so, but he led a successful mediation process between the government and the TPLF, so hopefully he's also in this entourage. And what I like about these mediation talks in Ethiopia is that there is a commitment. All these actors, the government and this rebel side, I'm hoping, OLA, there's a commitment to finding a solution. At least that is what they want to have at the end of all these things. They have a commitment at the end of the day. They want to have a stable Ethiopia. They want to be in an Ethiopia that they feel everybody is included and all voices matter. And so I think for this, it's easy to mediate because the end goal is for them to work out these issues and for them to still stay intact as a country and to find a solution. So that is easy. And I like that both sides have that commitment. So I hope that the issues that will be brought up during this process, both sides will be open to listening to each other. Communications channels will be open, and then they can iron out these issues, and then this, whatever it is that has been going on, should stop so that Ethiopia can embark on rebuilding the other side that it destroyed, and just rebuilding the lives of the people that have been affected by this senseless conflict that has been ongoing by the TPLF, and now the OLA also has been fighting with the government, and the government has been fighting back. So a lot has been going, but I like that now they've gone to the negotiating table. Violence is not always the answer. In fact, violence is not the answer. It's never the answer. Unless you're fighting Al-Shabaab, unless you're fighting Boko Haram, unless you're fighting ISIS, that is the only time, you're supposed to use force. and violence, because these are people whose aim is also to kill people and to maim people and to destroy. So there's no any other way to respond to them. But in other cases, violence is never the answer. And trying to find a political solution through a military means has never been very successful. At the end of the day, they tried during the 2 years war. TPLF fighting and the government equally responding with even a heavier, fight. And they lost. The government lost. TPLF lost. Because now the government has to go there and engage in the reconstruction, in the rebuilding. And everybody else, they common Ethiopians lost in that war. And for what? So the government, violence is never the solution. You can't have a political solution through the use of military force. A political solution must have a political settlement and a political engagement. That's how you solve these issues. And mediation, negotiation is part of it. So I think they are in the right direction and they're moving towards the right direction. And so we wish them well in this new process. And I want to believe that all actors are actually speaking in one voice, and their end goal is to find a peaceful resolution to this unnecessary conflict that has been ongoing in Ethiopia. So this makes me very happy, because outside of these countries that I've mentioned, I should add my name there, because I've been very consistent with asking, even begging sometimes, Prime Minister to allow to have a talk with OLA, and it won't hurt him. So I'm happy that he has swallowed his pride and he has agreed, and that is one of the good qualities of a leader. You can change your mind sometimes, and you can agree to talks, even when sometimes you don't agree with whatever will be said, but at least you can make yourself available and you can allow for those communications channel. But at least you've changed your mind and your government has changed its position. And now I'm sure where there are talks and where there are mediations and where people are seated on the table trying to solve a problem, things cannot really go wrong. And so our hopes is that a resolution that serves the people of Ethiopia the best way shall be reached as soon as possible. Now, this issue of South Africa. The drama about South Africa and wanting to leave ICC. Putin has a warrant of arrest that was issued last month by the ICC, which I think is, I don't know if it's really necessary, but the ICC issued that warrant of arrest anyway. And South Africa has been scratching its head over whether it will allow for a Russian President Vladimir Putin to attend the BRICS summit that is meant to be happening in South Africa in August. And so there has been a lot of activities around this, and I think I've been very prompt in giving you the updates as we get them from these developments. I think the latest we were talking about this story is that the ANC party had sent some its key top members to Russia to discuss the same issue. And we don't know what happened to that trip. I didn't get the results of that. I don't know what was discussed when they went to Moscow. But it is quite apparent the love that especially ANC party and its officials have, and the relations they have with Russia in particular, and that is pegged on the history of Russia and South Africa, and specifically the ANC party, because Russia was really quite instrumental in helping, among other countries and individuals, that helped South Africa and some of the people that were fighting apartheid. And so Russia was quite instrumental in that sense. That is the soft spot South Africa has, or rather ANC has, for Russia. Okay, so when it wobbles and takes these positions that it takes, then you have to understand where that is coming from. And so they feel indebted, and they feel Russia was there for them when it was really when they needed them. And so that relation goes quite. It's pegged on something important in South Africa's history. So there were conversations around, should Vladimir Putin show up in South Africa in person or send an official? I think the right thing for perhaps to do in this case would be for Russia to send maybe even its foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov. I think he's a very powerful figure in the Russian government, and they should send him, or any other person that the president can send. They should send him to OHA, to South Africa to attend this summit. I don't know if it's necessary at this point for President Putin to come in person in South Africa. So South Africa has been confused. South Africa has been on a limbo. South Africa has not known what to do with itself when it comes to this warrant of arrest against Putin, and it has tried to dance around it. And my initial guess was that, South Africa will allow President Putin to come and attend that BRICS meeting anyway. That was my initial assumption, because it had allowed Omar Al-Bashir, who also had a warrant of arrest in 2005, to attend a certain African Union summit that was happening in that country, and they did not arrest him. And Kenya, we also did that. So based on that history, I had made a presumption that they will perhaps allow, it will not matter to them, but they will allow President Putin. But I see it's not an easier decision for them this time round. I think because of the stakes that are being, because of the stakes and what is at hand here. And I think this is a much bigger problem than perhaps what Putin represents and what Omar al-Bashir represented, and the cases that have been leveled against him and the warrant of arrest against him. Because with Russia, the attacks are still ongoing in Ukraine. The conflict is still ongoing. So this is an active conflict. And then you want to have this person in your country. And you're mad at Israel because of what you say is the apartheid perspective, or the apartheid treatment it gives to the people of Palestine because of the active conflict over there as well. And now you're here supporting somebody who's been accused of these atrocities and whose country continues to commit these atrocities. And now you are conflicted. Where is your value system? I don't know. But I think at this point, South Africa perhaps should just ask Russia to have one of its key officials represent President Putin on this summit. Because at the end of the day, as much as the relationship between South Africa and Russia is really, really important to South Africa, we can see that. But also South Africa's standing with the rest of the world, I think it does matter to South Africa. And you can see because of this dilly-dallying and all this back and forth that it's having with itself, this dance it's having with itself. So earlier, President Cyril Ramaphosa had said that the ANC party, the ruling party, had come to a conclusion or to a determination that South Africa should leave the ICC. This is not the first attempt. South Africa had attempted to pull out of the ICC in 2016 following a dispute a year earlier when the Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir had visited the country. So they did not like that they were chastised. So they attempted to leave the ICC. So this time round, they also, according to what the president had said yesterday, which he had since retracted, he said that the ANC had taken a decision that it is prudent that South Africa should pull out of the ICC. And then hours later, the president said, regrettably, Ramaphosa had erroneously affirmed a similar position to the ruling party, but they had not agreed. I think this is just a conversation or something that came up during a meeting in the ANC, but they had not come to that conclusion. Obviously, it's easy to conclude that perhaps Russia is having an influence, and maybe it's the one that is pushing South Africa to get out of the ICC. There's a possibility. But also, having attempted to leave the ICC in 2016, maybe South Africa does not want to be patronized around by this International Criminal Court, and it wants to have some leeway while making certain decisions in the international system without having to have what do you call it? Without having to face any kinds of penalties that might come with some of these decisions that it wants to make in the international system. So it is torn. And the fact that the president retracted this, that tells you there's a lot of power play behind this. I'm sure after he made those statements, there were phone calls from the US, there were phone calls from these other countries that are not even part of the ICC that called and said, you can't do that, because we also have this A, B, C, and D interests together, and South Africa being the country that it is in this continent, blah, blah, blah. I think that will not be a good example, or this will not be good for the country. So they retracted. But you can see where the heart of South Africa. I think South Africa wants to leave the ICC. And if South Africa wants to leave the ICC, they don't need a reason or an excuse to have them leave the ICC. Let them leave the ICC. You don't need the case of Bashir to make you leave the ICC. If your position is this ICC is targeted and it's biased towards African leaders, and it's very targeted and biased in how it handles the cases that it and the cases that it chooses to pursue, which I think is a lot of Africans would agree with that. ICC is biased in the way that it has been handling some of these cases. Then if that is the basis and the premise of your conversation and your argument, and you feel it does not sit well with you as an African country, then you have every right to leave the ICC. You don't need, Russia to give you an excuse to act this way and then issue out a statement, and then minutes later or hours later come out and issue a regret. What are you doing, South Africa? And we have to remember that Russian oligarch, remember maybe a month early in the year, I think around January, a Russian oligarch sponsored or funded a convention for ANC. The whole of ANC party, as big as it is, as corrupt as it is, as wealthy as it is, I don't know if it's wealthy, could not fund a very important summit for the ruling party. So the Russian oligarch had to come in and sponsor that convention. So that tells you, and I think I say it here, when you have the things that external factors or external actors should not be having a hand in, that is the running of the parties in a country, the electoral process in a country, and other sectors. There are sectors in a country where it should be left for the country's leadership and for its people to figure out without having any external funding or influence. Because the minute you're having this Russian oligarch, and all the oligarchs in Russia are friendly to, they a lot of times work on behalf of the president. That is the truth. So the minute you're having them fund this convention, who knows, maybe this money was from Kremlin itself and it just passed through the oligarch to sponsor this convention for ANC. And once you have these people sponsoring your parties, then they will have an influence over your parties and the decisions that you shall be making, aka, like we're seeing now, ANC is deciding South Africa must leave the ICC. That is a problem. This interferes with the democracy in a country. This interferes with some level of independence. This interferes. And then we'll be out here saying the Western powers are interfering. We are sovereign countries. They should leave us alone to make our own decisions. And yet we have allowed them. We have given them a leeway. We have opened the door for them. And once they come and make themselves comfortable, now we become uneasy with the decisions that we've made to lead to that space. You see how we create our problems for ourselves? We are our own problem creators, and then we can't even solve these problems. So I think South Africa has to tread very careful on this matter, and it has to do what's best for South Africa. I understand the relationship between South Africa and Russia is really important to it, and because of those historical factors that I've mentioned. But outside of that, its relationship with the rest of the world is equally as important to it. Otherwise, we could not be having this back and forth that it is having with itself. But at the end of the day, South Africa should make a decision that is good for the country and for its people and for its position in the international system without having any undue influence. But if you can't fund your staff, then, undue influence is just part of it. I'm not accusing any country or any entity, but I'm just saying that is how that works. I want to thank you so much for your time this morning. I'll see you later with more news and more conversations from across the continent of Africa at 3 p.m. East African time. My name is Miriam Gutu. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.